Jesus is King. Welcome to the 1 Peter 5 podcast, rebuilding Catholic culture, restoring Catholic tradition. This is Timothy Flanders. I am the editor of 1 Peter 5. I'm joined by one of our contributing editors, Kennedy Hall. How you doing, brother?
Living the dream. How about you?
Excellent. How is the Canadian winter treating you so far?
It's not much different than the Midwest winter, I've heard, in the United States. So we're all in this together, as they say.
Yes, we are. We're all in this together. Have you? What are you guys playing hockey?
I have been playing hockey in the barn because they closed down the rinks for our health,
Yes.
which is good. It's actually hilarious. You know, it's not hilarious, but people went out and they, took their medicine in order to play sports, and then they closed it down. And then it's the enterprising people who weren't depending on the rinks are still playing. And I've been doing a lot of tobogganing with the kids. And going to take the kids skating when this show's over, actually.
Fantastic. So do y'all call it tobogganing?
Mm-hmm.
Do you use like a huge long sled where the whole family packs on, goes down a hill? Is that
You
how it
can.
works in Canada?
That's just the term we use. I know that some people call it sledding, right?
Oh yeah, we call it sledding because we use the smaller sleds.
We use both, but it's just like saying, I don't know, what's a term? Like people in some countries they call, and in Guatemala they call fridges Frigidaires because that's the brand.
Oh, okay.
Or it's like in the South where they call a pop, which is a pop. It's not soda.
Right.
And they call it a Coke. But it's like, what kind of Coke do you want? It's like, I want an iced tea. It's
Right.
just like this, the term is for everything, right?
Okay, but you don't use the smaller sleds. You use do you use something bigger? Like
we use both. I'm just saying
the big long sled.
We use both. It's just the activity is tobogganing.
Oh, okay. It's called tobogganing.
Excellent. But the tool can be interchangeable.
Fair enough. Excellent. Well, We are going to be talking about Kennedy Hall's new book, Terror of Demons, Reclaiming Traditional Catholic Masculinity.
There it is.
It's just been released by Tan Books, our friends over at Tan Books. There's a link below. And before we get to that, I wanted to just point out that we just released 2 articles today on what we're calling the post-liberal conversation. And the post-liberal conversation, what I'm referring to here is the liberal disorder that we live in, especially acute in our days of the COVID Brave New World.
Yeah.
We're living in the breakdown of the liberal order, complete breakdown of freedom in the era of freedom. And so we need liberal order, which is restoring Christendom. That's the heart of our editorial stance is restoring, rebuilding Christendom. And so how do we do that? That's the post-liberal conversation. How do we figure this out in terms of a distinctly anti-liberal message, meaning that we do not accept the liberal order created by the secular democracies and then their ugly daughters, namely communism and feminism. We don't accept that, yet we disagree on how to then build Christendom, how to then live. So Kennedy Hall has a contribution to this on libertarianism. It's called the Catholic Libertarian Monarchy. So you might be surprised what you read there. Definitely an interesting perspective on libertarianism that Kennedy has brought out to me recently. And then we also have the integralism point of view, also by Joshua May. So we have integralism, and libertarianism represented. If you would like to join the post-liberal conversation, feel free to send us a submission, editor@1peter5.com. So any comments on the post-liberal conversation, Kennedy?
If you'd like to poke the bear, you can write about libertarianism as a traditional Catholic. That's what I've learned. I had no idea, but here we are. Anyway, it's fun.
Yes, absolutely. So here's let me get so Terror of Demons, Reclaiming Traditional Catholic Masculinity. Here's the cover from Tan Books. See, Terror of Demons. So the title, tell us about the title, Kennedy.
Sure. Yeah. So I wrote the book actually before I had a title for it. I had a working title. I had listened to a sermon once, and this is from one of you and I, or one of our first, people don't know we've never met in person because the COVID curtain has kept us so far apart, yet so close. And one of our first podcasts we did together, I was telling you about the book, and I had a working title called A Different Sort of Man. Doesn't make any sense to the listener because they won't know the context, but it was just the working title. I had heard sermon calling for not just a man, but a different sort of man. And it made sense in that whole sermon. So that, it's a terrible title for book for marketing purposes, but it imbibed the spirit of what I was trying to get at in the book. Right. And so I wrote the book in September, basically, probably like 5 or 6 weeks. It was September 2019, before the world lost its mind. I guess it had already lost its mind in some ways, but our most recent iteration of madness. And one morning I woke up. It was actually the first day of school when I was still teaching in the high school. And I woke up at 4 a.m. and I was like, I'm going to write a book. And then I wrote about the book. I wrote the book, and by the time we were at an apple festival with our friends, it was after Mass on a Sunday. The weather was just changing. It was around Canadian Thanksgiving. That's around October 12th or so. I was done, and I didn't know what it was going to be called. And then I went to a retreat, and at the retreat, I was it was a silent retreat, and I was in there, and there was a chapel with a really beautiful picture of the Holy Family, with a really great picture of St. Joseph, like young and virile sort of thing. And I just, I don't know if I'd ever heard the litany to St. Joseph. I didn't really know much about it, but then it just came into my mind, terror of demons, over and over again, terror of demons. So I took that home with me, and I had written the book without expressly thinking about St. Joseph. But then when I went home after that weekend, I remember emailing one of my editors at the Fatima Center saying, I got to write about St. Joseph. So I did a 12-part series on St. Joseph, which is actually the appendix to the book. And it was, I realized that the book was inspired by St. Joseph the whole time. And I'm such an idiot that I never realized my whole life that my patron saint is St. Joseph. It's my middle name. I just always had assumed that it was my no-no's name, because it was Giuseppe, God rest his soul. It was, Joseph Vianney. And I didn't realize, no, that was actually my patron saint as well, and it was used at my baptism. I didn't even know these things because we weren't raised devout or anything, right? It was just a throwaway factoid from my childhood. And then I realized, my goodness gracious, St. Joseph's been behind this thing the whole time. And then I realized that this sort of newfound inspiration that I had for St. Joseph, specifically in this series of articles that I'd written, that's why the appendix fit on the book so perfectly. It's almost like a second book, like the actual, if you go through it, I think it's about 130 pages or so of the actual book, 135. And then the back of it is about 30 pages of St. Joseph. And it's almost like I don't pretend to be some sort of spiritual master or anything like that. That's not how I wrote it. I wrote it as an author. It's more of a literary, it's almost like more like literature than it is devotional reading, if that makes sense. And I realized that the whole thing was about St. Joseph. So it just was too fitting that it was Terror of Demons. And from a marketing perspective, that's a grabby title too, and people like it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in the book, you have a lot of autobiographical backstory as to how you came, sort of how these ideas and these practices really shaped you personally first before you started to write about it. Tell us a little bit about that, about your own sort of journey as a man of God, as trying to become a Catholic man.
Sure. So I was raised in the jungle. No, I'm just kidding. I was raised in southwestern Ontario, Canada, in a city called London, Ontario. And I actually write about it in the beginning of the book. There's a seminal moment when, so I played football, and Canada's known for hockey, but sport number 2, depending on the region, is usually football. And depending on the region, it might be number 1. Like if you go to Saskatchewan, those Rough Riders, man, they'll fit 30,000 people in a stadium, which is like for a province that only has 1 million people, and it's like 4 times the size of North Dakota. It's actually a lot of people to go to one game.
And that's American football.
It's Canadian football.
American football, but in Canada.
Canadian rule.
It's not international football, is what I mean.
No, yeah, it's gridiron football. That's one thing you learn, actually. The codes of football with the international sporting associations. Technically, rugby football, association football, which is where you get the name soccer. It's a short form of the word association. And gridiron football is with the pigskin. Anyway, so we played CFL football. So 3 downs, 110 yard field, and it was 65 yards wide, 1 yard off the ball at the snap. Anyway, it's a faster game, a lot more passing. Point is, my high school had an amazing football team. We won the equivalent of state twice, my grade 11 and 12 year. And our state semifinal, and this was sort of like quad A, like the biggest schools. My state semifinal, province semifinal in grade 12. We got snowed out because the game was supposed to be on like December 4th or something. We had a big snowfall. It was supposed to be on a Saturday. And it was on the turf at the university. So they just, you can play on turf when it's snowy. And we got postponed to the next day because the team literally couldn't drive to the city because the highways were closed. And so we postponed the game to Sunday. And because we're a Catholic school, our coach actually made us go to mass the morning of game days. It was a pretty good tradition, even like daily mass if it was like a Thursday game. And we went to Sunday mass as a team. And I knew my coaches. I don't know how devout they are. I don't know. I haven't talked to them in years. They were great men. Like, they were good men. They were virtuous family men and all that sort of stuff. I have no idea, like, I don't know what they follow, dogmas or whatever. I don't know. But I know when they all walked in, and these guys were like towering heroes to me. I mean, not only was the one coach about 6'4", a former university wide receiver, but they were men that were giant in their persona. These men worked harder than anyone I'd ever known. And they, I would run into a brick wall for these guys. Literally. I mean, if they told me to do that at training camp, I would have done it. And they said, like, well, the concussions are all in your head, coach. I'm fine, And, that would have been the way. And I would have done it gladly. And everyone who played for them would have. It was a given. It was a special time. And they all knelt down in prayer. And then I looked around the church and I realized that they were just like everybody else. Even though that they were the giants that I had respected for so long, but they were just like every other person there, and they were just a Catholic. And weirdly, though, they stood taller when they were on their knees to me than they did when they were standing. There was just something about it. And I didn't practice the faith at that time consistently. And I didn't practice the faith consistently for years until I went to Mexico and had a big conversion experience I write out about Guadalupe. But that moment, like, was stuck in my conscience almost like a wound. As I was committing sin and just living like an idiot. I wasn't as bad as some, and I was worse than others. At least I got married young, which helped with a lot of things. But I remember deciding whether or not I was going to apply to teachers college to be a teacher. And here in Ontario, the Catholic school system is funded by the government, which is a problem. But nonetheless, when you go to the government-funded school that teaches you how to be a communist teacher, you still have to tick the box whether or not you're going to teach in the Catholic stream or the public stream. And you have to take an extra course. It's nothing to do with actually knowing anything about Catholicism, but it's just, I don't know, tick off a box and you're a Catholic school teacher. At that time, I was kind of like an agnostic-y, listening to Joe Rogan. I was like a Rogan bro. I would listen to his stuff because I was looking for masculine things, Like, I was looking for, I like to work out. I like to think for myself. And like, in the secular world, that's kind of what you get. You get the Joe Rogan thing where it's a parody of masculine. I mean, there's some good things, he's been good on the whole lockdown stuff, but it's not virtuous. They still talk about evil images and, they're not like, it's not Christian morals all the time, So I was in this weird state where I was like, I don't want to be religious because I'm a sinful moron. But at the same time, I want to go teach. And the most inspirational teachers and coaches in my life were these men. And then that moment just flashed in my head over and over again. So I clicked the box and I said, I'm going to do the Catholic stream. And C.S. Lewis has a quote where he says, the moment you decide to look into Christianity is the moment you actually start becoming a Christian, if you look into it seriously. And that was it for me. It was slow and fast. That was 2013. Maybe. And then it was, it was mid 2013 or April or June or something. And then by the time February of 2015 came around, February 2015, I was all in. Like, I was huge conversion and became a complete Catholic maniac. But it was like, it felt slow in a way, but then it was quick. Anyway, that's how I got. And then so when I was in Guadalupe, this was in February of 2015. Yeah, when I was in Guadalupe, I was there as a chaperone because I speak Spanish. Bienvenidos a todos que escuchan. And I did not know anything about Marian apparitions. I didn't know what one was. This is the type of education they expected of Catholic educators here, And but I was the only bilingual in Spanish. I speak French as well, which is common, but not the Spanish. I was the only bilingual Spanish-speaking male teacher who was available to go on the trip as the male chaperone. So I'd met this friend of mine who became the godmother to my second child on the trip. And she was like a Steubenville grad, on fire, charismatic Catholic, just good stuff. And we had met at a conference in the fall of 2014 that all new employees of the school board went to. So I just went to it because it was like, sure, go to a hotel for 2 nights on your employer's dime, and there's wine and cheese, and I don't know, you just have a thing, right? So I went to that, and we became good friends. And she was really smart. Like she, for all the jokes we can make about, some problems with charismatic renewal and things, Steubenville is a good university, and they formed their students with good theology and stuff. So she knew stuff, and I was searching, right? So I would ask her questions. She's like, you should look into this Peter Kraft guy. You should look into, Scott Hahn, like all these things. And when you first discover those things, you're like, my goodness gracious, where has this been my whole life? What the hell was I doing with my life? Especially when you're an academic kind of intellectual person. I'm not saying I'm smart, but when you're into that sort of stuff, you sink your teeth into it and you go, wow, there's a whole. So she actually bought everybody on the trip that was going on a book. There was like 15 kids or something and 2 adults. So she got everybody a book. She got me Mere Christianity. And so I read that on the trip, and I was like, I was eating the book. Like I was devouring it. I couldn't believe it. It was so good, And so when we came back, we went on the trip, and then we were there. And I was so dumb about what a Marian apparition was. I didn't know what the tilma was, but I was standing in front of it, and they're like, look up there. I'm like, oh, that's what that is? Anyway, forgive me for being such an ignorant idiot, but that's where I was. But in 7 days in Mexico, we were there in like a garbage dump shanty town, very Mother Teresa-esque situation. It was, you break down emotionally, right? I mean, you really do. And that's what happens in conversions in people, I mean, God comes to you in your weakness, and all the moral things were coming up. So anyway, one night we were all praying, as the charismatics do. And I just started blubbering like a baby and just whatever. And then the next day we went to the shrine, which I finally figured out what it was, because we went on the first day we were there. I didn't know what I was looking at. And then we went again the last day. So we went to the shrine, and I woke up with the worst headache, like a migraine. And I'm not a migraine guy, but it was like, low pressure system kind of headache. And it was not low pressure. It was beautiful, sunny weather, very dry desert, sunny weather in Mexico City. And in February. And I ran. If you've ever been to Guadalupe, those stairs, it's a 7 or 8 minute climb. I was up there in 5 minutes, like sprinting like a child. And I knelt in front of that shrine for 2.5 hours. I didn't know how to pray the rosary properly. I prayed the beads wrong. I knew the Hail Marys, but I didn't know what the big ones are for. I was like, oh, glory be our Father. Oh, she'll know. God will understand. And I did that 2 times through, and then I just sat in this classic Mexico. It's you can't say it's a third world country, but you can't say it's a first world country. It's like, it depends on the day and depends on the region of town. So it's this beautiful world-class Vatican-esque, shrine. And then the chairs they have are like flimsy little plastic chairs from Walmart that if you're over 200 pounds, they kind of like bend under you. So I sat in one of those as a 240-pound guy, and it was like, bowing underneath me. And I sat there for another hour or so, blubbering like a baby. And I came back from Mexico, and I said to my wife, sweetie, things are going to change. Life's about to get crazy. And she was like, that's nice, honey. I'm glad you had a fun trip. That poor woman. Little did she know. And then I decided to write all about that stuff. And I thought when I was teaching in the school system, everyone was going to believe the same things as me, which wasn't the case. And that's pretty much, and that later that year, we had our first son. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I wasn't scared, because I was married and had a conversion. I obviously wanted children, but I realized, I'm from broken home and, modern family, that sort of nonsense. And I went, man, I really don't want to suck at this. And, I'm supposed to raise him to go to heaven. I mean, this is a big deal. So at that moment, I really started to devour as much information on virtue and being a good husband and being a good father. And there's a lot out there, but you got to find it's like in pieces, and there's like a sermon here, or there's an essay there, that sort of thing. Get Principles, that magazine from Christendom. They had a really good essay I read that really shook me. I remember reading it going, wow, it was like based on Aristotle and stuff and about the role of the father. And So by the time I was ready to write this book, I'd been thinking about writing for years. And I didn't know the church used to have this tradition where if you had converted or reverted, you were supposed to wait 4 or 5 years before you published. I didn't know that was an unofficial tradition, but I ended up waiting about 4.5 years. I resisted the temptation during those years to write because I was like, yeah, St. Thomas Aquinas said the Summa Theologica was straw, so it was good for dung and putting in fire. What the heck am I going to contribute? So I waited till it was time. And then I sat down and had absorbed one of the problems. One of my continual issues with the editors was I didn't cite much. I wrote in the paragraphs, so and so says this, or in this sermon, Father so and so said this, but I had just devoured it so much that it was just in my memory. I was just writing like, obviously everybody knows this because like, how wouldn't they know this? And then so the book was so natural and easy to get out. But it was the culmination of like 4.5 years of consuming things that I finally synthesized. And that's the short story long.
Excellent. So is there, this seems to be a unique book in that respect. There's very few books that really deal with Catholic masculinity as this sort of one-stop practical shop. How important is the topic of Catholic masculinity in your mind?
Well, it's huge. The word, and you're right that there's not other books like this. There is a book by Tan called The Manual for Masculinity or something like that. And they had that series of books that they had a manual for spiritual warfare, manual for marriage or something. It was a good book, but basically it was selections of writings from the catechism and from some saints. And then it was Bishop Olmsted's, I guess encyclical you called that he put out a few years ago called Into the Breach or something. It's good. It's fine. It was good thing. But it wasn't like an original book. There's really not much. So as far as, and actually it's funny, there are a lot of books amongst Protestants about like being a real man and stuff. And a lot of, there's a lot of books for homeschooling Protestant families about, like how to do rites of initiation, in a sense for your son and that sort of stuff. But for some reason, it's just not, I don't know. We don't have it much. And maybe it's in another language we don't have in English. I don't know. So, but it's really important because the word man in Latin is the word vir, and the word strength is basic. Like man is basically the derivative of the word, or however that would work, of the word for strength. Like they're synonymous. So in old literature, you read things like so-and-so acted manfully. You could say that about a woman, but it means they acted virtuously. You can find literature from the older days about saints, and they'll talk about, Saint so-and-so, she wanted to have manly nuns. No, she did not mean pants-wearing nuns like the modern nuns. She meant she wanted nuns that were actually virtuous, okay? Virtue, and so words matter. Jordan Peterson is famous for saying that, words matter. They matter a lot. And they do, they really do. This is why the left and the Marxists, they always go after words and they try to change the definitions because they know that Mao knew that. Mao would talk about how words were basically time bombs. They were basically bombs that you could use to destroy civilization if you change the meaning of just one word that disseminated in a certain way. And masculinity has been attacked. And one of the objections that I'll get is they're like, why would you write a book, for men? And it's like, because I did. Somebody else could write one for women. You could write about a lot of things. You could write a book for dogs if you wanted to. I don't care. You could write a book for anybody. I just wrote one for men because that's the problem I wanted to address. But I'm sure you could also write books for women, and that's great. You should go do that. And but masculinity has been really attacked. Femininity has, well, of course, through feminism and things. But masculinity is like a bad word. It used to be that they would say that it was only toxic masculinity that was bad. If just that like super masculine guy, he's bad. But then the APA or whatever, psychology association, whatever it is, last year they finally just admitted it, and they said that masculinity in and of itself as a construct is just a bad thing. So it's just like being a man is bad, and I don't know, don't be a man then. And in the church we see the problems of that. It's I don't like speaking poorly about prelates. It's not like something that I have fun doing, but your average seminary is often struggling to find masculine men to become priests. And I think in men, and I know this for a fact in where I live, that they intentionally reject them and intentionally pursue effeminate men, meaning men who are soft and men who are not virtuous. They allow video games in the seminary. Um, they go to class with the regular students. They go to class with women. They wear their plain clothes. I mean, just they don't even try to make them into virtuous men anymore. And that's why I wrote the book, because it's a dire need right now.
So let's get into some of the controversy. You mentioned
Sure.
effeminate men. That's your chapter 2 is called Effeminate Men.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to get into what is effeminate, what is effeminacy, what is masculinity. Can you break down some of these definitions? So can you
Mm-hmm.
you started talking about vir, manliness is strength.
Mm-hmm.
Can you contrast masculinity versus effeminacy? Define those two things.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So masculinity is the perfection of male, of a human male. It could also be a metaphysical characteristic to describe things. Like, for example, you could say there's a masculine landscape. This is part of the sort of, it's almost like positive and negative in science forces. There's always a passive or a receptive, and then a giving. That's always back and forth. That's in nature. Okay, man in the basic sense, male gives, female receives. This is why you even see this in like microphone cables. You have the female end and the male end. That's just basic, built into things. But then when it comes to men, masculine is the perfection of what that man is. Okay, so God creates us. Obviously, in the original sense, we were not fallen, so they would have had him, some sort of infused perfection, whatever. But there are certain things that are particular to men and particular to women that have a lot to do with biology. Of course, men don't have children and women do, and that's a big deal. It's so easy for us to forget that nowadays, because like children are an afterthought. It's like, no, we have birth control and abortion, so having children is a choice for women now. And fine, I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But the point is, traditionally, understanding who a man is and what a woman is. Femininity is a perfection of woman. So her feminine characteristics, which are natural to her in all times and all places, will be perfected, and we would believe, with sanctifying grace through the faith in the proper sense. And then the masculine is the contrary to that. So as far as what effeminacy is the word basically means etymologically something like being soft. So Thomas Aquinas talks about this. You could say that a door is effeminate if it leads to blows, like if you can knock it over easily. Some people, one of the controversies with the term is that when I wrote the book, people thought uneducated people who hate Catholicism thought that the word effeminacy meant homosexuality. So one of the descriptions, like you pulled when we first published it with Our Lady of Victory, one of the quotes you pulled, which is a great quote, was, "And effeminacy is a plague and must be eradicated." And that turned into, "You want to kill all the homosexuals." And I'm like, well, that's not what I wrote about. But it's just the way, I mean, people, it's like the word pride, I mean, people use the word pride for, "I'm proud of you, son," or "That's a sin of pride," or "That's a pride parade." They all mean different things. I mean, people use words in funny ways. Hence why I said the meaning of words matters a lot. So femininity basically means to be soft. And that applies to physical and applies to virtuous. You don't have to be like some sort of Arnold Schwarzenegger figure to be non-soft physically. You just can't be a lumpy couch potato who, couldn't pick up his son out of a pool of water if he's drowning. Like you got to have some sort of constitution to you, because God gave you a body, and your body has things you're supposed to be able to do with it, and it's your duty to make sure you can do those things, just like your mind. So yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, so you talk about it as it's a reluctance to suffer.
Yeah,
because you are addicted to pleasures. So before
that's right.
we get further into that, because you go through some basics as to how to overcome effeminacy, how do you contrast? You did this a little bit, but how do you contrast effeminacy and femininity. Can you contrast those two?
So I've found a variety of information. I think women can technically still be effeminate. I don't know. It's never used to describe women who are unvirtuous. But it's rare because, again, we have these defects. We have these perfections in men and women. So then the contrary to that is a defect. So it's particularly revolting when a man is soft because he's not supposed to be soft. It doesn't mean he can't be tender, right, with his children and things, but he's not supposed to be a pushover in various ways. With a woman, it's not particularly striking when she's not that way, when she's not acting in a manful way. It's just not. It's something about who we are. I think women are so naturally tender. I mean, everyone's different, but it's just, there's a reason why like 99% of kindergarten teachers are women. They're mothering for a living, for goodness sake. And there's a reason for that, is because it just is much more natural. That's why they go into nursing and these sorts of things. And when they try to mess with that, it never works. And it actually, Jordan Peterson talks about a study from Sweden where it made it hyper the opposite. It was, they were trying to make more engineers as females and more males as nurses, and they really propagandized it, and it revolted people away from their professions. Because the men who were going into nursing were going into it because they were more tender. So when they made it look more manly, they're like, ugh, I don't want that. I don't want that in the first place. And the opposite was true for the women who went into engineering. Anyway, so femininity is a perfection of woman, whereas effeminacy, although it sounds like it in English, it has no basis in what femininity itself is. It's just a sad coincidence of our language. So people see effeminacy and they're like, femin, you hate women. And it has nothing to do with it. It's just there might be an etymological root with iphiem and tenderness. I don't know. I have to go back deeper into language studies, but it's more of just a coincidence of language.
Yeah. So you say it's effeminacy is a vice opposed to perseverance.
Yes.
So you're not going to persevere and carry the cross if you're effeminate. Mm-hmm. Whereas femininity is the particular perfection of feminine nature, mm-hmm. Which has certain characteristics, like you said. So would you say effeminacy, like you said in the book, effeminacy is a plague and must be eradicated? Is this kind of like the number one enemy of masculinity, like kind of the enemy number one to be conquered?
Yeah. So the number one enemy is devil, which is the first chapter. Devils really want your soul. But the way that devil wants you to act is to be effeminate. I think it's the primary vice. I mean, obviously the primary vice is pride, but anyway, all these things have sub sins and daughters of sin, or whatever they call them. And just observationally, my goodness gracious, can you imagine what it would be like if men just stopped watching evil images, if they never had seen them, if they stopped? I'm not anti-video game. You can play some games or whatever if you want, but I'm just saying, as a habit, you're just sitting around like a slouch and whatever. And, if they would just do some push-ups and, challenge their mind a little bit more rather than just scrolling through Facebook or whatever, like everybody else. And there's nothing wrong with leisure. You can watch the odd movie or something. That's fine. But, we can't, people talk about, I'm going to take back the country, or I'm going to take back the church. It's like, no, you're not, because you can't take back your family. You can't take back your body mass index. You can't take back your checkbook, for goodness sake, because you can't stop buying stuff on Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace because you're soft, So if men are not going to rise up and become virtuous, then we're screwed, So men have to do that. That's this. If you want to fix the church, fix yourself. If you want to fix your country, fix yourself. Jordan Peterson says, clean your dang room. It's true. If you want to fix your marriage, I mean, fine. If you have to go to counseling or something, I don't know. I'm not commenting on anybody's particular situation. But how about this? How about instead of, how about you get up at like 5 a.m? You'll be fine. Don't worry. And have a cup of coffee, go walk your dog, do some push-ups, and read the Bible. I guarantee you'll fix your marriage, or you'll start to. I'm serious. It's that simple. Go to confession. How about that? You want to fix seminaries. How about you take the video games away from the seminarians, for goodness sake? How about you make the seminarians do hard stuff? Look at what they used to do in the seminaries, the Holy Ghost Father, for goodness sake. You read Lefebvre's biography, and they would make them go outside and walk around in the freezing cold in northern France and read outside with no gloves on while walking. Why? The purpose was to get them sick, because they said, you're going to go be in the bush, you're going to be a bushman, you better be able to get over some sort of fever. So they would basically, these men would intentionally overwork them to make them sick. Lo and behold, you go to the middle of the jungle, you could survive malaria, and you can bring the gospel and save souls. We don't do any of that. You get in your car and you drive to work, and you sit at your desk and you go on Facebook and you watch YouTube, and you get in your car and you go home. Maybe you go touch your Bowflex or something, I don't know. And then you watch your Netflix on your computer in front of you, on your chest while you're laying in bed, and you go to sleep. What's going on there? We don't ride horses anymore. We don't do much by hand. So all of these things used to be natural. You'd have to, even if you were a bookworm, you had to ride a horse in the elements to go somewhere. Even if you ride a horse and buggy, I live around the Mennonites, right? I mean, goodness gracious, even if you sit in a buggy and guide a horse in minus 30 degrees Celsius, you get tough. You're not in a car with, my point is, there's all these things. Those are all gone. So now we have to implement them into our lives. And this book gives you the tools to do so.
Yeah. Speaking of being a Michigander or a Canadian, I remember reading of one of the Braves, I think it was in the Iroquois, where the Braves would just go shirtless all year round, just because that's what Braves did. They were just tough.
Okay, why not?
Going shirtless in a Great Lakes winter. That's pretty cool. So this is all well and good. But how do I implement in my life? Let's say I'm a young man. I hear this talk. I hear this podcast. Wow, that sounds great. I'm really effeminate. I need to change my life. What's the number one thing I should do? What's the first step?
First step is go to confession. Go to confession. Do a general confession. Confess every known sin you have. If you haven't confessed it already, I'm not telling you what, confess things twice or something. And then I would say it's a balance. It's like coaching. When a kid comes out for their first rugby practice and they've got an athletic background, I can push them a little bit harder. If they don't have an athletic background, I have to push them, but I can't push them too hard because they won't come back. Or they might get hurt. Okay. So personally, I grew up doing a lot of hard physical things. So for me, I can go and clang out the weights and whatever, and it's fun for me. And I can fast and whatever, because those are things I always had to do for sports, cutting weight and all that sort. So that was an easy transition in a sense. Other things were very hard for me though. But if you don't have a background like that, don't think, okay, I read this book, I hear this podcast. He's talking about getting in shape and praying the rosary and all these kinds of things. I'm going to go do all that right now. No, you're not. Just, if you usually get up at 9 a.m., just get up at 7 o'clock. And just get up at 7 o'clock and go for a walk. And just be awake and be productive and just get your blood flowing. Do that for a month. And pray the rosary. But just, and then, okay, 7 o'clock's fine. Okay, next month, get up at 6 o'clock. And then, okay, what you're going to do, I'm going to have a cup of coffee, and then I'm going to go do some push-ups. Just 10 push-ups. I don't know. Just do something. The point is, where you're at. You're going to have to push yourself to be uncomfortable, but you can't push yourself too far because then you'll just burn out. And then after that, I would say the first thing you have to do, though, is one of the first things you have to do is you have to pray the daily rosary. Hey, Clover.
Daily rosary.
Go to the bathroom, Clover. That's me, Clover. Go on, sweetie. She just got up from her nap.
Oh, yeah.
Go on.
Taking care of business at the Hall household.
Go on.
I really love what you're saying, though, because it's like that's great wisdom in terms of a moderate conversion, because sometimes, I think it's rare, but some people can have this massive conversion and immediately change all their habits, perhaps with some extraordinary grace, but we shouldn't expect some kind of extraordinary grace. That would be kind of an act of pride, basically. You need to just say, well, okay, what's the very next baby step I can take here to become that man, to overcome effeminacy? So this is great wisdom. What would you say is the role of fasting?
Oh, fasting is huge. Personally, fasting is a big one for me because I grew up with the football diet. I just drink a gallon of milk and 10 bananas and half a chicken for supper and lift weights, and then you'll be a good offensive lineman. That was what I grew up with. So It's easier for me to go and like try to do a stupid amount of push-ups in an hour than it is to skip a meal. Like there's just fasting is hard. It's very hard. And there's a reason why Christ says, some demons are only driven out by prayer and fasting. There's definitely a spiritual aspect to that. Yeah, talk to an exorcist. What is the metaphysical reason why the preternatural realities react to you fasting? I don't know. But I know on a practical level, when you fast, you are weak. You're broken down. You have to be more conscientious with your thoughts because you don't have as much brain power. You have low blood sugar, that sort of thing. So then at that moment, when you're trying to live a virtuous life, you have to depend more fully on grace. You have to depend more on God's on the intercession of the saints and so forth to God for you in your life, because you will not be able to do it alone. It's like, if you think about physical training, you might say go and do like a run at altitude. You're going to give yourself a disadvantage on purpose. Fasting is like that, but in a different way. It's kind of like the opposite side of the spectrum of having to do physical exertion. It's more like, now I'm taking away that ability from you. Now what are you going to do? And so it's very effective for the life of virtue.
Would you recommend a young man or a man trying to snap out of effeminacy to join an Exodus 90 group?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. I've done the Exodus 90 two and a half times. We did it at Advent this year as a half one, just as like an Advent discipline. Now I know some traditionalists, they are persnickety about the fact that, okay, for example, like Exodus 90 starts in middle of January and we're still in Christmas tide and we're still supposed to feast and all that sort of stuff. Well, there is no prohibition against feasting on feast days in Exodus 90, so that doesn't really work. And I know it is a Novus Ordo program, so to speak. It's the men who started. It's like, Novus Ordo calendar. I've done it as a traditional Catholic. I just follow the traditional calendar, and on the days where it's not a feast, I just fast. I mean, it's not that difficult. But the thing about the Exodus 90, which is so unique, is that there's disciplines that are not necessarily part of the church's tradition because they're responses to modern problems. So, for example, everyone talks about, in the mainstream parishes with Father Bob, well, for this Lent, you should really focus on fasting from complaining, and you should fast from being negative, and you should fast from, maybe you should fast from watching so much television. And it's like, well, that's meaningless. But this one actually says, like, you can't watch TV. You can't watch, or any videos outside of work or whatever you have to do. You can't just go and watch Netflix. And then you're accountable. That's a big deal. That's not part of the traditional norms in the Catholic tradition because there was no TV in the Middle Ages. Probably better that way. But and then also the cold showers are big, and that's just good psychological science. Wim Hof, take him or leave him, he's got some weird ideas, but he made these cold therapy very popular. It's very effective. Cold therapy is really effective for men who are trying to fight the vice of pornography. Because the way that addictions essentially work is they basically flood your brain with blood. Okay. This is why somebody's addicted to cards or something. They get this itch, this feeling where they can't shake it. They're almost like hot inside. It's like a feeling that almost like you're scared. It's almost like an exhilarating feeling. And they know that for their particular situation, there's a certain activity that's going to satisfy that itch. Okay. So it can be anything, but for most men, in our day, it's evil images. Okay. If you have cold showers or a cold baths are actually easier than cold showers. Or you live in Canada and you go run around your backyard like a Iroquois brave with your shirt off. All you need is 2 minutes. And what happens is, and this is just basic science, is because your body then goes into I need to survive mode. This is a stimulus that I'm trying to react to. You have this massive flood of blood and hormones to all your extremities. The hormones don't go to your extremities, but the blood goes to your extremities. And you have this massive intake of breath. You go, and that's why you get into a cold tub or something like that, and you have this massive intake. So you fill yourself with more of the blood cells that come from oxygen than you would otherwise have, and it actually gives you a euphoric feeling. This is why jumping into a swimming pool, if you live in Michigan or Ontario and it's hot in June, the pool's still like 65 degrees, but you're like, dang it, I was inside all winter, I'm jumping in the pool. And you jump in and it's like a cold tub. For 10 seconds, you're like, oh goodness, I gotta get out. And then 5 seconds later, you feel so good. And you go, wow, this is the best feeling ever. Why don't I jump in this pool every day? That actually helps you with vices because your body is seeking some sort of euphoric exhilaration. This is a way of doing it lawfully. So I've told men before that I've counseled about this, evil images, especially. They're like, before it happens, I get this like feeling like nothing can scratch that itch. I've tried working out, I've tried whatever. I said, have you jumped in a cold tub? And they said, no. And that's the key. So I'm really a big fan of it. I don't do it all the time. I write in the book often. So I do it during penitential seasons. Every once in a while, I'll just be like, I haven't had a cold shower in a while. I crank it down and scream like a little girl in my shower. And, but it's just a nice reminder and it's really good for you.
Excellent. Cold showers. So you've mentioned a few times the phrase evil images.
Yeah.
And so viewers, what Hall is talking about is pornography. And your chapter 5 in the book is called The Devil's Playground. It's all about the plague of pornography, these evil images. And so what is step 1, 2, or 3 on that? You haven't covered on overcoming that, which is also a big problem.
Destroy your computer and your iPhone is step number 1. And people say, oh, that's extreme. It is extreme. Yep, you're right. The fires of hell are really extreme. So why don't you be extreme and not go there? People will say, well, I need my iPhone for my job. You got to get a new job. There's a great resignation going on right now. You can find a job anywhere. Everywhere is hiring. It's stuff like,
true. Yeah.
And seriously, I mean, even the mandates, they're dropping everywhere at least. And, and I'm being a little bit facetious, but I'm not. It's funny. There's actually a good Protestant movie. It's cringy, but it's a good message. It's that guy who used to be that child star or whatever. Anyways, in this one of those movies, and I can't remember what it's called.
Like
Fireproof or something. Yeah, there you go. Fireproof.
Yeah.
And he has a problem with pornography. The reason I call it evil images as well, because pornography is like a very clinical, sanitary word. It doesn't sound evil. It's kind of become part of the people say like, oh, it's fear porn, So I'm just like, let's just call it what it is. It's evil images, right? And I got that from you. And so at that one point, he realizes he has this problem. So he takes out his desktop computer and he just smashes it with the baseball bat and puts it in the garbage. Nice. And it's like, that's a triumph, So, okay, you got to get rid of the devices that give you the problems. And then you're going to have to find something to fill that time. And again, we're assuming you're going to confession and stuff. You're a Catholic. You have to obviously do the things to be in a state of grace, objectively speaking. Okay. But then the habit. So you get rid of the problem. And then you got to identify the behavior that's associated with the problem. So, people will say, well, I got rid of my computer or my iPhone, but now I play video games or something. And it's like, hey, you're missing the point. Okay. You were watching that stuff. And aside from the explicitly sexual part of it, it was also facilitating a dopamine kick. That was the neurological effect. So now you've substituted that scrolling of images and videos with dopamine kick from playing video games. You're still training the same addiction receptor, if that makes sense. And then eventually when you're having a weak point, you'll fall back into it. So it's kind of like, someone says, I used to be an alcoholic. I'm going to quit drinking and still be a bartender. It's like, no, you're not. You have to leave the bar. You can't stay there anymore. Maybe one day you will be able to come back. The analogy fails because there's no lawful way of viewing pornography. I'm not saying, but there are people who are alcoholics and then 5-10 years later, they can go to a bar. They can be around people drinking and they're totally fine. But there's people that can't. So you have to identify the level that you have. And then you probably fail. You'll fall. Unless you have some extraordinary grace, but you'll fall. So then when you fall, you have to say, okay, how is it that I fall? It's like, okay, it's every, I don't know, I'm making up something here. It's like I work the afternoon shifts. once a month, and I'm always good for a couple weeks, and then I'm like home alone and I'm bored, my sleep pattern's off, and at I don't know, like 10 in the morning, I finally wake up and nobody's home, I get into trouble. So you have to make a new routine now.
Yeah.
You have to have a schedule every time you have afternoon shifts that you go play golf or whatever. I don't know. At like, even if it means less sleep, you're playing golf every afternoon shift week, 5 days a week. I don't care if you go to the cheap course, get a membership or whatever at 9 in the morning, because you know that in your situation, it's not that you wake up thinking about it. You're trying to be virtuous. It's just that when you're idle, then it creeps up. Now you have to never be idle. Does that make sense? So you got to find those weaknesses. Those are the practical steps I would take.
Absolutely. Excellent. Here's some questions. Can Kenny give some practical tips on fasting? Should we have 2 snacks and a whole meal, or water fast for a day?
Sure. So there's a lot of debate on fasting in church tradition, or a lot of, not debate, but just different ideas. Fasting technically means like having no food or water in the fullest sense. So to get to the point where you could do something like that, and I'm not like some master fasting guy, like I just do basic fasting. People will say 2 snacks and a whole meal. That's sort of like what the USCCB and the sort of the Canadian Bishops Conference, they'll say like have 2 collations and whatever. Personally, just my own perspective of my own body and blood sugar levels and that sort of thing, I find to do better when I just skip meals and just don't eat till supper or something like that. If I have those little picadillos, if I have those little those little tiny snacks, then I find they kind of like make me hungrier. So I just don't think it's very effective, to be honest. So I would just recommend, first and foremost, if you snack all day, then just don't eat between meals. And you'll actually that's what Exodus 90 recommends. You'll be surprised. You'll cut out a third of your calories and you'll be, my goodness, I'm eating, and your waistband will get smaller and stuff. And then once you got that under control, then it's like, okay, also cut down putting sugar in your coffee. And then after that, okay, this Advent, I'm going to skip breakfast. And then at Lent, I'm going to skip breakfast. And then I'm also going to have no meat on Wednesdays and Fridays. And you just, keep adding things like that.
Excellent. What about tips on building a domestic church? You've got chapter 7 is about the domestic church. So how we've kind of talked about masculinity being reclaimed personally. How do you then take back your family and truly be the man of the house?
First and foremost is you have to sort out your own virtue. So you do. Okay. So, I'll give you a personal story here. So I had my conversion. My wife followed, which was great. And she had an authentic conversion as well. It's amazing what a husband converting will do. But then it was a couple years before we were praying together every day as a family. My children are very small. I mean, my oldest is 6 and my youngest is 2 years old, of the 4 kids. So, it wasn't as if every night we're doing the family rosary. I was praying the rosary every day. I started that habit in 2016 or 2017 or something like that, And then after a while, it was like, my wife would pray with me sometimes. And then now it's just a given that the family prays the rosary every day, either in the car if we're driving somewhere after supper or whatever, or in the living room after supper. It's just normal, And then we have the Angelus, and then we say grace before meals, and then we have the liturgical thing. So, the main thing you have to do is you have to get your own prayer life in order, because it's important for you to have your own virtue sorted out. And then you take steps to install basic things. And then another practical thing, if you have a life that works against virtue in prayer, like, how should I put this? You're trying to be Catholic, but then all of the habits that you have as a family are very worldly. Then you're also going to have to say, well, how can I make a church if my church is like the world? So it's just kind of like the problem with the churches that look like they look like a modern building. It's like you walk in, you go, this isn't really a church. So in an actual physical sense, get a lot of religious art and get a lot of statues and stuff like that. And then, like I've got crucifixes everywhere. I like to say my prayers in the living room before the kids are up. Sometimes kids wake up, whatever. And then, so I got to say my morning prayers. It takes like 5 minutes. I go to a corner by a closet. I look up, there's a crucifix there. I can pray anywhere in my house because everywhere there is a reminder of Christ.
That's great. Another question on fasting. Chris says, what about when you're sick? What do you do when you're sick and you have applications of fasting?
I don't think you're required to fast when you're sick, just in general. I know you're not required, for example, like to keep a Eucharistic fast if you had to eat for some sort of sickness, if you're pregnant, you don't have. So I mean, if you're sick, you're carrying a cross, and then you'll know how sick you are. But that doesn't mean like, oh, I'm sick, I'm just going to go have a Big Mac before Mass or something. It's like, yes, like you are sick, so you need to, drink some orange juice and have some toast when you were trying to skip breakfast. But that's fine. But let's just use your common sense.
Yeah, you can always bring your sickness to the passion of Christ and unite it to the suffering of Christ is what you need to do. Because, like you said, you're offering something up. So we got about 5 more minutes. You've got some other chapters in here. You've got Braveheart chapter. You've got Camel Knees. You've got Our Lady. Final thoughts on becoming a terror of demons?
Buy the book. No, that's part of it. But I don't mean that facetiously. I would actually recommend people get the book because this is like I was the test case, and I'm not saying that I'm some sort of good person. I'm just saying I've done everything in the book. I've figured out all the things like in there, and I know in my life it's been amazing. Aside from my personal failings, I think it's helped me improve. And I'll tell you what, this last while, in this last 2 weeks to slow the spread here in Ontario, Canada, it's incredible. It's been unbelievably restrictive. It's been a real challenge. And I don't know how I would have reacted and how I would have stayed true to my principles if I wasn't already training myself to do so. And I think the book came out 2020. I wrote it 2019. I had been going down that rabbit hole of those sorts of things for a couple of years before then. And when the communism hit, I was ready. And I'm glad I was. And so I think that first step is please, I would ask people to buy the book and because it will be helpful to you. And then do your best to implement the disciplines and take the wisdom for what it is.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Kennedy, because people are struggling with the communism. They're struggling with the scandals in the church. How do I remain Catholic? I'm struggling with my faith. Well, I think this is a really great practical thing to face that, because it really faces the struggles that are in yourself, and really gives you practice of virtue so that you can truly be strong in grace. So let's offer up Our Father at the end. I'm going to pray the Holy Face prayers, and we'll close it out. Please buy Kennedy's book. It is linked below in the link. Terror of Demons, Reclaiming Traditional Catholic Masculinity from Tan Books. You can pick that up today. So let's pray. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Let God arise. Let his enemies be scattered. Let them that hate him flee from before his face. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Jesus